name is Shelley Bleiweiss, and I am a child of 2 Holocaust survivors. I am also the chair of the Commemoration Committee of the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust, and on behalf of the committee, I welcome you to our annual Yom HaShoah commemoration. It has been 3 years since we've been able to gather like this in person, and we are glad to see so many of you here today. Yom HaShoah, or Holocaust Memorial Day, is a time for remembering the 6 million Jews persecuted and murdered by the Nazi regime and their collaborators. Their goal was to eradicate every single Jewish man, woman, and child from the face of the earth and destroy the memories of their existence. But let's not forget there were other victims of the Nazi regime: the chronically disabled, the Roma, the Jehovah's Witnesses, male homosexuals, and political prisoners and POWs. These victims were not just numbered. Each had a name and a story. This is what we must remember, the memories of their existence. But today is also a day for honoring those who survived the Holocaust. And to the survivors here today, I say thank you. Thank you for your courage in sharing your experiences and for the lessons you have taught us. And thank you to your many descendants, like our main speaker today, who continue sharing those memories and the impact they had on our lives growing up in the shadow of the Holocaust. Today we honor the righteous among the nations, the many non-Jews who risked their lives during the Holocaust to save Jews. We add to that the many non-Jewish educators throughout our state who feel the passion and need to continue teaching the lessons of the Holocaust. We honor the soldiers who liberated Holocaust survivors from Nazi concentration camps and other sites of incarceration and saw firsthand the horrors of the Holocaust. And we also pay tribute to those victimized by other genocides, including the people of Ukraine. And now I ask you to stand and join Lexi as we sing together our national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets and anthems were singing there, gave proof to the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Can you hear me okay? Very good, thank you. Hello everyone, and good afternoon, and thank you for coming out today on a beautiful day. My name is Mike Abramson. I am the chairman of the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust. Our Holocaust Commemoration Committee has brought you this commemoration today. On the back of your program at the bottom, you will find the names of the members of the committee. If you see them, please say hello and thank them very much. And at this time, may the members who are here today on the committee please stand so you can see who they are. Shortly, you will hear from my longtime friend, Amy Bush. Amy is the chair of the Board of Trustees of the Jewish Federation of Raleigh-Cary. The Federation has donated this beautiful space on the David R. Kahn Community Campus for today's Holocaust observance. The Federation also paid for the printing and postage of the postcards promoting this event. Thank you very much, the Jewish Federation of Raleigh Caring. Phil Brodsky is the Executive Director of the Federation and was instrumental in making the pavilion available. Thank you, Phil and Amy. And after the commemoration, if you'd like to speak with Amy about the programs and services of the Federation and the JCC, please speak with her. Also, soon you will hear from Talli Dippold. Talli is an excellent speaker and a leader of many national and international Holocaust educational organizations. She's also a member of the Holocaust Council. I deeply admire Talli's many accomplishments and her guidance on Holocaust-related issues. The North Carolina Council on the Holocaust was established in 1981 and is currently organized under the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. The Holocaust Council is dedicated to educating communities, school students, and classroom teachers about the Holocaust and lessons learned from the Holocaust. I have with me a governor's proclamation from Governor Roy Cooper, establishing today as North Carolina's official day of Holocaust observance and memorial for the entire state. Please come see me after if you'd like to look at the commemoration document and proclamation. The Holocaust Council has traveled to almost every county in the state multiple times to present workshops, exhibits, plays, and speakers to school students. We also provide lesson plans, books, webinars, teacher workshops, and other instructional material to teachers and schools to support their efforts to teach about the Holocaust. Please browse our two websites which are on the program. The Holocaust teaches us to respect the values of democracy, inclusion, and plurality. The Holocaust teaches the necessity of safeguarding the rights of all in a diverse society. We know that the Holocaust isn't a Jewish event, it's a universal issue. By studying this history, we learn lessons about how to become an upstander, someone who acts or intervenes on behalf of themselves. In a moment, Richard Schwartz will speak about the Holocaust Education Act that was passed in November. At this time, I would like to ask Karen Klage to stand for a moment. Karen is the chair of the Holocaust Council's Program Planning Committee, the direct liaison to the 30,000 plus school teachers around the state. Please speak with Karen about the state of Holocaust and inclusion education in our public schools. She fights that fight every day in the trenches. Thank you, Karen. It is fitting that we honor the survivors, victims, and liberators of the Holocaust today, and that we emphasize the lasting lesson from the Holocaust, that every person has a responsibility to confront and denounce anti-Semitism, bigotry, racism, hatred, and genocide. I will end my greeting by quoting the great Martin Luther King. His words, in my mind, epitomize the lessons of the Holocaust and why we teach the Holocaust today. I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states in this great country. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider. Thank you very much.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Is it clear? Great, thank you. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Amy Schwartz, and I'm the president of the Board of Trustees for the Jewish Federation of Raleigh Caring. It is my sincere pleasure to welcome all of you to here today to our beautiful David R. Kahn Community Campus. Events like this one today comprise just a small part of the services and programs we are proud to support in our community. The mission of Federation is to be the central Jewish organization that builds a welcoming, engaging, and empowering Jewish community for everyone in the greater Raleigh area. Through our agencies, Jewish Family Services, the Jewish Community Center, the Jewish Community Relations Council, and PJ Library, the Federation supports our community in the following ways. We provide counseling, case management, and transportation services often based on a sliding scale. We deliver kosher meals to those in need. We organize sports programming for all ages and offer inclusive Jewish summer camp experiences so that our children can grow up with Jewish friends and develop Jewish pride at a young age. We offer free Jewish-themed books for families of young children that are delivered regularly in the mail to their homes through PJ Library. We provide social, cultural, and educational programs for all ages with special programming for seniors. And through our Keshet program, we engage and support local Holocaust survivors. And last year produced a full-length documentary about our survivors coping during COVID-19 called Where Can I Go? The lessons of the Holocaust teach everyone from all religions and all walks of life to never discriminate against anyone and to assist those in need. The Jewish Federation holds the values of fairness, equity, and compassion to the highest standard possible, reflective of our mission, services, and programs. That is why we are so proud to partner with the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust, led by my good friend and fellow Federation board member, Michael Abramson, today and always. I hope you find today's Holocaust Remembrance program both moving and enlightening. Today's commemoration to never forget can serve as a reminder for each of us to give back to our community in a meaningful way. Together, let's leave a legacy for generations to come. L'Ador, L'Ador. Thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon. I'm Richard Schwartz. I'm the Vice Chairman of the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust. I don't think I have to tell anyone in this audience that there is a tremendous lack of understanding and a tremendous amount of ignorance out there about the Holocaust. Survey after survey has demonstrated that. At this commemoration, we focus on the victims of the Holocaust and our commitment to make sure it can never happen again. And I'm thrilled to be able to tell you that we have taken a giant step forward in North Carolina on that count. On November 18, 2021, Governor Cooper signed into law the state budget, which included the Gisela Abramson Holocaust Education Act. The North Carolina Council on the Holocaust has been working on this legislation for several years. Portions of the legislation made key findings by the General Assembly that align Holocaust education with the requirements for a sound basic education under the North Carolina Constitution and with the Never Again Education Act, which was passed by the United States Congress in May of 2020. The General Assembly made key findings that knowledge of the Holocaust is essential to provide students with the fundamental understanding of geography, history, and political systems necessary to make informed choices on issues that affect individuals, communities, states, and nations. And that legislation also adopts the definitions of anti-Semitism, the Holocaust, and Holocaust denial and distortion, and other findings from the Never Again Education Act passed by Congress. The legislation establishes a new law in North Carolina called Education on the Holocaust and Genocide. It requires the State Board of Education to work with the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust and the North Carolina Center for the Advancement of Teaching to review the middle school and high school state standard course of study and to integrate into English, social studies, and other appropriate courses education on the Holocaust and genocide. It also requires the development of middle school and high school electives on Holocaust studies. And it requires the Department of Public Instruction, again working with the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust, to create effective professional development to deliver this curriculum content in a manner that will be appropriate and will honor the victims of the Holocaust. The new law includes a $350,000 appropriation for this current fiscal year and another $400,000 for the next fiscal year in order to allow us to acquire curriculum content and to prepare and implement the professional development that will deal with the Holocaust and genocide, again, with the direct involvement of the Council on the Holocaust. We had key support in this legislation from the Speaker of the House, Tim Moore, from State Representative Jeffrey Elmore, from the President of the Senate, Senator Phil Berger, and from Governor Cooper in order to get this legislation passed. And our initial efforts to get this legislation approved had incredible support and leadership from the late Representative Lyndon Johnson. Since the passage of this new law, the Council is now partnering with the State Department of Public Instruction under the direction of our State Superintendent, Dr. Catherine Truitt, and with support from the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and others to work on the course content, standards, guidelines, and curriculum development that will lead to the effective implementation of these new courses and the professional development to assure their effective implementation. Finally, I'm very pleased to be able to remind you that this new law is known as the Gisela Abramson Holocaust Education Act, in honor of our late beloved Holocaust survivor and tireless speaker and educator to untold thousands of teachers and students over her lifetime. Gisela remains an inspiration, and it is so fitting that this law is named for her. She was also a founding member of the Council on the Holocaust and the mother of Michael Abramson, our longtime chairman. I want to end these remarks by expressing my great appreciation to Michael for his help in getting this legislation passed. Michael, your mom's proud. Thank you.
We now rise together as you're able for the singing of the partisan song.
Sog nicht kein Mul, als du gehst im letzten Weg, wo steht Weinen, verstellten Leute. Komm in Welt, nach uns der Reist gedeckt der Schuh, es wird der Point an uns, der treut mir seinen Tod. Komm in Welt, nach uns der Reist gedeckt der Schuh, es wird der Point an uns, der treut mir seinen Tod. Never say that you've reached the very end. Then skies up and a future may pretend. For the hope for which we viewed has yet arrived, and on marching steps will thunder we survive. For the hope for which we viewed has yet arrived, and on marching steps will thunder we survive. Please be seated.
Today is set aside to commemorate the Holocaust. We remember the victims who perished. We honor those who survived. And we thank those who liberated the camps. Although we cannot erase hate, we consider today what hate can do when left unchecked and what happens when hate is allowed to flourish. Many sitting here today have been personally touched by the Holocaust. A few of us are witnesses and survivors of the atrocities. Many of us have loved those who survived the atrocities, loved ones. Some of us feel the pain that comes simply from knowing and caring. Today's speaker is Talli Dippold. We are so proud to have Talli here with us because she exemplifies the idea of survival. She is a descendant of grandparents who survived the cruelty of the Holocaust. Pursuing a lifelong passion, Talli earned a master's degree in genocide and Holocaust studies from Graz College. Talli has traveled extensively throughout Eastern Europe and has participated in numerous educational opportunities to learn more about the Holocaust. Talli has been an active member of the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust since 2013. She is an executive board member of the Association of Holocaust Organizations and is a new member of the Jewish Heritage of North Carolina Board of Trustees. Additionally, Talli is the Stan Greenspon Director of the Holocaust Education Fellowship Program and is the Associate Director of the Stan Greenspon Holocaust and Social Justice Education Center. Talli is a tribute to her family, to all Holocaust survivors, and to those who have fought against and continue to push back against hate. We are very proud to have Talli here with us today. So please help me welcome today's speaker, Talli Dippold.
The world stops on Yom HaShoah in Israel. I was born in Jerusalem, Israel, and as a child, there was no option of not knowing Yom HaShoah. For 2 minutes at 10 a.m., the world stops entirely as a siren wails throughout the country. And I remember the only sound I could hear during the siren was the beating of my heart. School children, dressed in all white, participate in commemoration ceremonies where they hear from survivors about their excruciating experiences and what they had to overcome to rebuild their lives. In America, Yom HaShoah is different. It is not a national holiday, but instead, it falls upon Jewish communities or Holocaust organizations to ensure that Holocaust commemoration happens. I am grateful to the North Carolina Holocaust Commemoration Planning Committee for creating this commemoration, to Maxine for that lovely introduction, and to Michael Abramson and Richard Schwartz for their tireless dedication to ensuring that Gisela Abramson Education Act became a reality. And thank you all for creating this moment here in North Carolina for everything to stop, to allow us to take the time to hear and honor the legacy of the victims, survivors, and liberators. It is my honor to share my grandmother's story today. Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, falls on the 27th day of Nisan on the Hebrew calendar, this Wednesday night. This day has a full name, a more appropriate name, Yom HaShoah V'Hagevurah, literally meaning the Day of Remembrance of the Holocaust and Heroism. Gevurah also means strength. The word Shoah appears in the Bible more than a dozen times and signifies complete and utter destruction. To call this day Yom HaShoah, a day for remembering the horrific destruction of Jewish communities under the Nazi reign of terror, only tells half the story. Today needs to be one of remembrance of heroism, strength, and determination as well. Today is first a day for remembering the destruction. We light candles and remember the horrors and the devastating loss. Today is secondly, a day for remembering heroism and strength. We celebrate the strength of the survivors and the determination of the survivors and liberators. And today is lastly, a day of witness. The Jewish commandment Zachor, to remember in Hebrew, is not passive, but active. Our remembering and witnessing is meant to move us to do everything in our power to prevent genocides from happening again by taking a stand against all forms of hate. Both in Israel and in America, hearing Holocaust testimonies is at the core of this day. Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel said, "The idea of telling these stories is to sensitize people, that you should become more sensitive to yourself, to your friends, even to strangers. Become sensitive, not only to the story of what we try to tell, but about what happens even today, because what happens today is always related to what happened then." He believed that by hearing another person's story, a sacred responsibility was bestowed upon you. You became a witness. So today, as I recall and bear witness to my grandmother's story of devastation, despair, determination, and strength, let us consider the legacy that she left to all of us and the ways her story calls us to create positive change. My grandmother, Freda, and I had a very special relationship. She called me her Hartsganef, meaning heart stealer in Yiddish. I remember her as a sweet grandmother who made the best matzo ball soup, had a smile that could light up a room, and the softest hands I've ever felt. Today is first a day for remembering the destruction. My grandmother was born in the industrial town of Lodz in central Poland. It was the second largest city in Poland at the time with a very diverse Jewish population. The town had approximately 230,000 Jews who made up 1/3 of the community. It was an industrial textile city, a connection to North Carolina that is not lost on me. My grandmother came from a large, close-knit family. Her childhood was filled with family celebrations, laughter, and love. The family business was metalworking, and many of the aunts, uncles, and cousins were employed in the business. My grandmother recalled the fanfare when the Nazis occupied her city. Because her city was reserved for German resettlement, it was annexed to Germany and renamed Litzmannstadt just 7 days after the invasion of Poland. Life changed overnight for my grandmother and her family. Edicts and orders prohibited her from spending time with her non-Jewish friends. Humiliating laws forbade her from walking on the sidewalk or sitting on a bench, and she was ordered to wear a yellow star with the word Jew on her garments. She recalled learning from her grandparents' neighbors that they were taken from their beds in the middle of the night. During this time, her father was beaten by the Nazis, and she recalled that he was never the same person after that experience. He was disillusioned, filled with fear, dread, and disbelief. He felt that the Germans were so cultured and civilized that he could not comprehend what was happening around him. He was a strong man, but he could no longer accept his reality. Although the occupation marked the beginning of despair for my grandmother, she still recalled moments of joy at family gatherings, and her mother constantly trying to make the new normal not so bad. In early February 1940, the Nazis isolated the Jews by establishing a sealed-off ghetto, imprisoning 160,000 Jews in a small area and detaching them from the outside world. The ghetto was surrounded by barbed wire fencing, and anyone caught trying to escape was killed. The living conditions in the ghetto were horrendous. On average, 8 to 10 people lived in each room. My grandmother and her family were assigned to a tiny room with no running water or sewage system. Due to the filth, disease such as typhus spread. Her mother was resourceful and came up with tactics to make everyday life more manageable. Little simple things, like she told my grandmother to make her bed every day, that the simple act of making her bed would remind her that normal times were not that far away. The population in the ghetto continued to grow, with transports arriving daily, delivering Jews from all over Nazi-occupied Europe. The ghetto was overcrowded, and during its operation, more than 20% of the population died as a direct result of the miserable living conditions. The ghetto was administered by the Jewish Council, led by an infamous Mordechai Rumkowski. Rumkowski found himself in an impossible position between obeying Nazi orders and trying to help Jews cope with the hardship of life in the ghetto. The philosophy that guided his leadership was salvation through labor, a flawed notion that survival would lie in the Jews' high productivity, making their role too valuable for the Nazi authority to murder. Unfortunately, all Jews were ultimately targeted for extermination, no matter how productive they were. Jews who survived at various camps as laborers only did so because the machinery of death did not catch up to them before the end of the war. Today is secondly a day for remembering heroism and strength. My grandmother recalled that first moment of resolve through an interaction with the leader, Rumkowski. She had a friend whose parents had been deported, and there was a family that wanted to adopt her, but the adoption was not approved. One day, as my grandmother was on her way to visit her boyfriend at his work factory, she saw Rumkowski on his horse carriage. When she passed him, she worked up her nerves to ask him if her friend could be approved for adoption. As he came down from his carriage, my grandmother anticipated that he would help her friend, but instead, he slapped her across the face, got back on his carriage, and left. My grandmother was stunned. She quickly recovered and never regretted making the request. This incident sparked within her the Gevurah, the strength that this Yom HaShoah v'HaGevurah commemorates. Her encounter with the flawed and deluded Rumkowski gave her the will and determination to overcome the insurmountable challenges that lay ahead. The Lodz Ghetto became a major production center under the Nazi occupation, with the creation of factories and the availability of free, forced labor. By July 1942, there were 100 workshops within the ghetto, producing everything from ammunition to textiles, most notably uniforms for the German military. A factory was established for a group of 300 individuals with similar metalworking skills, and my grandmother's family was assigned to work at this factory. The work conditions were harsh, and the demand to produce an enormously high set number of goods was beyond their capabilities. As compensation, workers received a portion of soup and a slice of bread each day. During my grandmother's 4 years in the ghetto, she managed to maintain her resolve that the situation would improve. She endured the difficult days by envisioning a better future. She watched as many of her friends and family members departed the ghetto, told that they were being relocated, but never heard from again. The tragedy that befell the children of Lodz was the most heartrending. It was announced that children would be taken to a better place and resettled, offered more food, security, and a better living condition. Jewish children all over Nazi-occupied Europe were targeted, and ultimately 1.5 million were murdered. My grandmother's family had heard rumors of extermination camps, but to them at that time, they were unbelievable. Even when my grandmother was confronted by someone who had escaped to tell those in the ghetto that those who were relocated were murdered, my grandmother's father told her not to believe these rumors. In January of 1942, deportations from Lodz to the Chelmno extermination camp began. It was the first stationary facility where poison gas was used for the mass murder of Jews. By the end of 1942, almost half of the Jews interned in Lodz had been murdered in Chelmno. By 1944, there were only 75,000 Jews left in the ghetto, and it was decided that the metal factory employees would be relocated to a different location to keep working towards the war effort. In fall of 1944, the remaining inhabitants were ordered to walk to a nearby train station with their few belongings. My grandmother was on the last transport to leave the Lodz ghetto. She recalled black boots, dogs, guns, and being herded onto cattle cars. From that first train ride, she recalled the pervasive stench, hearing children cry, and people praying. They had no idea what the future held for them. Upon entering Auschwitz, she thought they had arrived at an insane asylum when she saw people wearing striped uniforms. Soon, she was wearing them as well. Immediately, men and women were separated through a selection process. Younger, healthier people were sent to one side, and older people and children to another. They were ordered to leave their belongings on the train and told that they would be reunited with their belongings later. Of all of the horrific experiences that my grandmother endured, the processing at the camp was the most humiliating. She was ordered to take off her clothes and place them in a room with shower heads. Water came out of the shower, but not far away, there was a building built to the same specifications where the elderly, sick, and young were taken, and instead of water, poisonous gas descended on them. Her long braids cut off, she was shaven from head to toe, and she was issued dry pajamas and wooden shoes. She recalled seeing a reflection of herself and not recognizing the girl in the mirror. Her recollection of these moments were blurry, no doubt due to the trauma of it all. In the Spielberg testimonies that she recorded in 1997, she recalled running towards the barracks shivering. She recalled spending the night on the floor and in the morning being marched outside to be counted. Being given a rusty bowl filled with water, turnips, and potato peels, and a dry piece of bread. They were not given spoons, as they were not considered human. When one hears Auschwitz, gas chambers most often come to mind. But Auschwitz was far more complex. There was Auschwitz I, the main concentration camp, located on the outskirts of Auschwitz Ii in German-occupied Poland, and originally established in 1940. There was Auschwitz II, most often known as Auschwitz-Birkenau Killing Center, 2 miles from the main camp, which the prisoners were forced to build themselves in 1941. And Auschwitz III, or Monowitz, 4 miles from the main camp, was built in 1943 as an industrial subcamp. There were more than 40 Auschwitz subcamps, exploiting the prisoners as slave laborers at various German industrial plants between 1943 and 1944. Overall, an estimated 1.3 million people were sent by the Nazis to Auschwitz between the years 1940 and 1945. Of those deportees, approximately 1.1 million people were murdered. The majority of those who arrived at Auschwitz were sent directly to the gas chambers, primarily mothers with young children, babies, children under 14, and the elderly, which at that time meant over the age of 40. While the vast majority were Jewish, 74,000 Poles, 21,000 Roma, 15,000 Soviet prisoners of war, and 15,000 other nationalities were murdered there. During the Holocaust, tattoos were given at only one concentration camp, Auschwitz. And only those incoming prisoners selected for work rather than death were assigned a camp serial number, which was sewn to their prison uniforms and emblazoned on their skin. Deemed capable of work, my grandmother and her family were assigned prisoner serial numbers, but not tattooed, as their time in Auschwitz would be brief. Within 2 weeks, her work group was herded onto another cattle car and headed to an unknown destination. Days later, they arrived at a second camp called Stutthof in Germany. It was every bit as awful as Auschwitz, but less well known. Stutthof was just one of more than 44,000 camps and other incarceration sites, including ghettos, established between 1933 and 1945 by Nazi Germany and its collaborators. The camps ranged in purpose from forced labor to detention of those deemed to be enemies of the state, to mass murder and genocide. The conditions in Stutthof were brutal. Many prisoners died from typhus epidemics that swept the camp in the winter of 1942 and again in 1944. Those whom the SS guards judged too weak or sick to work were either gassed in the camp's small gas chamber or killed by lethal injection, a fate met by more than 60,000 victims. It was here that my grandmother's worst memories would be formed. The horrible conditions, the extreme cold, the men and women separated from one another, and the dreadful day my grandmother was able to meet her brother along the fence, only to encounter him crying, using hand motions to make it known that their father and uncle had died of starvation and disease. For my grandmother, there was no time to mourn. Moving on with determination, she focused on caring for her mother and maintaining contact with her brother, living one day at a time and allowing herself to be transported in her memories to the past, to her childhood with her family, and to dreams for the future, dreams of the food and warm house she hoped would be awaiting her after the war. After 3 long months, they were once again loaded onto a train and transported to a third concentration camp, a factory building in Dresden, Germany, where they were forced to labor, working with metal in the basement of an ammunition factory. They stood for 14 hours a day and only took breaks to eat soup. There were no windows in the factory, and many people got sick and died. Men and women were once again separated, and one day she learned that her brother was sick. She was able to send him her portion of the food for a few days to help him gain strength, and he recovered. On the evening of February 13th, 1945, a series of Allied firebombing raids began against the German city of Dresden, reducing the city to rubble and flames and killing 25,000 people. More than 34,000 tons of explosives were dropped on the city by 800 American and British aircraft. The firestorm created by the 2 days of bombing set the city burning for many more days, littering the street with charred corpses, including many children. My grandmother's factory building was hit with an incendiary bomb. Everything around her was ablaze. But the Nazi officers never stopped watching over them, even as the building was partially demolished. They took them out of the building to the courtyard, and my grandmother describes how, out of desperation, they were reduced to digging scraps of garbage from the trash can around them. They were marched through the burning city to the outskirts, where they stayed in a meadow. 2 young women managed to escape in this chaos. One was caught and brought back, and they were forced to watch as she was tortured and killed. Nobody escaped after that. The final stage of devastation would be the death march. After waiting for a few days, their guards decided to walk them to an unknown destination. It was March of 1945. They walked along the river for days, and people who could no longer walk collapsed and were shot on the spot. They were sick, weak, and hungry, but they kept walking on what became known as a death march that would last over 2 weeks in freezing conditions. They were walking towards Czechoslovakia. To my grandmother, it seemed like an eternity. The death marches were a final effort by the Nazis to hold on to slave labor for production of armaments, use prisoners as bargaining chips, and to prevent prisoners from falling into enemy hands and telling their truths. My grandmother was marching with her mom and a group of 3 young ladies who had been together on this journey since their time in the Lodz ghetto. She recalls walking through a picturesque small town. She saw curtains on windows, food on tables, and lights in warm houses, and thought that she will never again live like that. These people had beds, families, and food. Out of nowhere, a German civilian came out from the bushes and handed her a piece of bread. She referred to that man as her hero. Had the guards noticed him, he would have been shot on the spot. She always taught me that it is important to remember that even during the worst times of humanity, there were good people, like this unidentified German civilian who dared to give a starving Jewish girl a piece of bread. Years later, she recalled on the testimony that she left for Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation the following story. We were sick, freezing, covered in lice, blisters on our shoeless feet. As Allied planes flew overhead, the Nazis would whistle and we would throw ourselves to the ground. The Nazis would whistle again and everyone would get up. And those who did not were shot. The 5 of us made a pact, in our pain and desperation, that we would not rise again at the next whistle. We were mentally and physically exhausted. The moment arrived. The Nazis whistled. We reached out and held hands and threw ourselves into the snow. I felt a profound peace. Everything would now end. And then the whistle blew again, and each one of us jumped up. Our will to live was so strong. 1 week later, the group arrived at a desolate train station at a forested point. They were told to board the wagons that were stationed there. My grandmother, her mother, and her small group of friends were not going to be told what to do anymore. As one of the guards turned away, they decided to rush through the gaps in the wagons and escape into the forest. They were chased and shots were fired in their direction, but their desire to escape gave their starving bodies energy to run. My grandmother recalled that once they were free and liberated, she realized that there was nowhere to go. She was later reunited with her brother. She and her mother ended up going back to her hometown of Lodz to discover that nothing of her past life was left there. She stated in her testimony that this was the worst period of her life. Once she was no longer in survival mode, she had time to grieve the many losses that she had endured. But she did get back up. She used her determination to move forward. She regained her health, and with the mentorship of a friend, she was able to find work that she loved and slowly started rebuilding the life that she had envisioned. My grandmother was a survivor of the Holocaust, but that was not the sole focus of her legacy, nor the entirety of her identity. She immigrated to Israel, had 3 children, 15 grandchildren, and over 50 great-grandchildren. That is her legacy. My grandmother influenced my life, and she continues to. I learned important lessons from her that I carry with me each day and work to impart on others through my work at the Greenspon Holocaust and Social Justice Education Center at Queen's University of Charlotte. I wanted to share them with you today. Her first lesson would be one of resilience. She would want us to know that she used her strength and resilience to deal with the challenging chapters of her life. She would want us to remember that when she was knocked down in life, she always got back up. Her second lesson was to help others and be sensitive to human suffering. Late in her life, my grandmother turned her insomnia into a gift by helping others. She volunteered at a rape crisis hotline. Many survivors put their energy into making this world a better place by taking action to improve the lives of others. Thirdly, adapt to circumstances you cannot change, no matter how difficult. Although we have no control over the attitudes and behaviors of others, we can choose how we react in any given situation, even in the most horrendous circumstances. Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist Dr. Viktor Frankl, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, concludes, "Forces beyond your control can take away everything you possess except one thing: your freedom to choose how you will respond to the situation." And finally, find meaning and purpose in your life. Freda always found meaning during the difficult phases, the different phases of her life. After the war, her focus was on rebuilding, learning a new language, and getting acclimated. She then focused on her career and raising a family. Once my grandfather fell ill, she dedicated herself to his care. For my grandmother, there was an added dimension: finding meaning in survival. Many survivors found a sense of purpose by bearing witness to the atrocities they endured. As witnesses to history, they speak passionately about their hope for a world that is free from racial intolerance, bigotry, and hatred. My grandmother accomplished this by becoming a docent at Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Museum. My grandmother's survival is an example of the human spirit's ability to adapt, rebuild, and recover from genocide. She personally experienced the darkest side of humanity. She provides hope and sets an example for anyone who is experiencing a traumatic life event. In Israel, the world stops on Yom HaShoah. In America, we make time to stop, to listen to stories such as my grandmother's, to remember the devastation, to learn from the heroism and determination, and to witness by resolving to combat hate. May we use the sacred responsibility bestowed upon us as witnesses to create meaningful change for the cause of peace in our today, in Ukraine, in the United States, and in our world. Thank you.
Amazing. My name is Maxine Sennett. Can you all hear back there? Good. My name is Maxine Sennett. I am the child of 2 Holocaust survivors. It is an honor and truly a privilege for me to host the candle lighting ceremony. It is the Jewish custom to light memorial or yortzeit candles on the anniversary of a loved one's death as a symbol of the living memory of the deceased person. This custom has been adopted by Holocaust commemorations throughout the world, with remembrance candles lit to represent the living memory of the 6 million Jews and the 5 million other precious souls murdered in the Holocaust, and to honor the righteous among nations, non-Jews who saved thousands of lives. Our ceremony consists of 9 lit candles. I will light the first candle. That candle is called the Shamas Candle, which will then light the other 8 candles. The next 6 candles will be lit by Holocaust survivors or children or grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. The 7th candle will be lit in honor of the liberators of the death camps, slave labor camps, and detention centers. The last candle will be lit by an individual who represents the righteous non-Jews who saved Jews and others in the Holocaust. The Shamas Candle will then be placed in an empty candle holder by an individual or individuals who represent the victims of genocide and hate crimes in the world. This Shamas Candle is being lit in memory of Gisela Gross Abramson. Gisela was a founder of the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust. She was an agent in an espionage unit of the Russian resistance forces, and she survived the Majdanek death camp. Gisela immigrated to the United States in May of 1946. May the memory of every Holocaust victim inspire us to pursue meaningful and purposeful lives. Blessed art thou, soul of the universe, who melts hatred like candle wax, leaving only a loving heart. I now invite Florence Link to light the first of 6 candles that commemorate victims of the Holocaust. Florence's parents and 2 children were living in a small shtetl, little village, near Vilna in June 1941, when the Germans invaded Lithuania. Soon after the invasion, they managed to flee deep into Russia just before the Germans massacred almost all 4,000 Jews of their shtetl. Everyone in Florence's extended family living in the shtetl was killed. Both children died of disease and hunger. Her parents survived the war and made their way to Austria, where they were rescued by the American Army and stayed in a displaced persons camp. Florence was born in the DP camp and immigrated to the United States with her parents in 1951. I now invite Chaim Poran to light the second of 6 candles that commemorate victims of the Holocaust. Dr. Poran is the son of 2 Holocaust survivors. His mother was born in Kriva, Belarus. During the Holocaust, she endured the horrors of the Kovno ghetto and the Stutthof concentration camp before being freed by the Soviet Army. His father was born in Krakow, Poland, and miraculously survived the war in hiding. Most family members of both his parents were murdered by the Nazis. In 1948, his father traveled to Israel, joining the Israeli army to defend the newly reborn state. His mother immigrated to Israel in 1950, where his parents met and were married in 1951. They both passed away in Israel. Dr. Poran is a member of the Holocaust Speakers Bureau, and has published his parents' Holocaust survival story, Holocaust to Hope. I now invite Talli Dippold to light the third candle to commemorate victims of the Holocaust. Talli is the granddaughter of 4 Holocaust survivors from Poland. Her parents were born in Poland, and shortly after the war, she was born in Israel. Talli is committed to keeping the legacy of the Holocaust survivors alive through education. She is a member of the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust. I now invite Lex Silberger to light the 4th candle representing victims of the Holocaust. Lex was born in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. The German army invaded his native country in 1940, and 2 years later, a month before his 7th birthday, Lex and his family fled from the Nazi occupation. They succeeded making their way through Belgium, France, and Spain, and ended up in a refugee camp in Jamaica. The family found asylum in the Dutch island of Curaçao. Lex's grandparents, who stayed behind, were deported and murdered in Auschwitz a few months after the family had left. I now invite Anita Berman to light the 5th candle to commemorate victims of the Holocaust. Anita's parents were married in a displaced persons camp in Bari, Italy. Anita was born in that same displaced persons camp in 1947 and immigrated to the United States in 1950. Anita's mother was from Cluj, Hungary, and survived Auschwitz, with one sister while losing her father, her brother, and other sisters at Auschwitz. Anita's father was from Lomaz, Poland. He lost his entire first family in a mass killing. He was a partisan for 5 years. I now invite Mariana Miller to light the 6th and final candle for victims of the Holocaust. Mariana was born in Prešov in Czechoslovakia, now Slovakia. Her parents sent her to England in 1939, right before the start of the war. Mariana's parents hid in Hungary until near the end of the war, when their hiding place was divulged. They escaped and then fled back to Slovakia, but were apprehended and imprisoned. Mariana's parents were murdered at a mass execution site in Slovakia. Mariana immigrated to Chicago from England in 1952. I now invite Stan Serksner to light a candle to honor the liberators of the death camps. Stan was in the U.S. Army from mid-1951 to mid-1953. He served in Korea for over 18 months, and he endured heavy combat. I now invite Ray Gonzalez to light a candle in honor of the righteous among nations. Ray graduated in 1991 from the United States Naval Academy. He currently works for the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. Ray has been a member of the Holocaust Commemoration Committee for 5 years and is passionate about protecting the rights of people from all walks of life and from nations and religions. Especially today, the Holocaust Council is thinking of the Ukrainian people. I would like to ask Mike Abramson and Jackie Fishman, my apologies, to place the Shamas Candle in the empty candle holder to commemorate victims of genocide and hate crimes in honor of the folks in Ukraine. I now invite all Holocaust survivors in the audience to please come up to the front of the pavilion. Even if you already lit a candle and you are a survivor, Mariana. Would second, third, and fourth generation descendants of Holocaust survivors please join us in front of the pavilion? Let us all observe a moment of silence as we remember our dear ones and resolve never again. Thank you all for your observance of this moment. Please return to your seats.
We
The Holocaust was a unique event in world history that must never be forgotten. Its lessons and relevance must continue to be taught because we know what can happen if we allow hate, extreme prejudice, and discrimination to flourish and become official policy. And yet in our country, there seems to be a growing antagonism towards a culturally diverse society. We're seeing an increase in white supremacist terrorism, a rise in the number of hate crimes, and a record number of anti-Semitic incidents. Elie Wiesel said, "I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Indifference is what allows evil to be strong, what gives it power. We must not let silence and indifference be the victors. We must denounce hatred, bigotry, and acts of intolerance. We must promote tolerance with our voices, actions, and example. We must acknowledge and accept the other person as a fellow human being who is entitled to the same rights and privileges we have, regardless of their religion, cultural background, skin color, gender, belief system, or lifestyle. As President Kennedy said, tolerance implies no lack of commitment to one's own beliefs. Rather, it condemns the oppression or persecution of others. And all of us know that the Holocaust did not start with gas chambers. It started with politicians dividing the people into us versus them. It started with intolerance and hate speech, and escalated when people stopped caring, became desensitized, and turned a blind eye. Talli, thank you so much for driving in from Charlotte to be with us today and sharing your inspiring story. I'm privileged to have you as a friend. Thank you to my friend Maxine for helping make today's program so meaningful and for stepping in at the last minute to help lead memorial prayers since Rabbi Graber had a family emergency and could not make it today. A big thank you to the Raleigh Jewish Community Center for allowing us to hold our commemoration ceremony here at the Kahn Pavilion and in the beautiful surroundings. Special thanks to Boy Scout Troop 500, chartered by Wake Forest United Methodist Church, for volunteering to help us today. You've already met the members of the Commemoration Committee. I want to personally thank each and every one of you for your input, perseverance, and support during this challenging process of making this program happen today. It has been my honor to serve as your committee chair for the past 5 years. I thank you all for joining us today, and let us end with the singing of America the Beautiful.
We'll rise together.
Oh, beautiful, for spacious skies, for amber waves of rain, for grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for pilgrim feet who stern in passion stress a thoroughfare of freedom meet across the wilderness. America, America, God bend thine every flaw, confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty law.
Again, thank you all for coming. Drive home safely. One more thing, if you would like to help out planning the next event, feel free to see me or Mike. If you want to get involved with the Holocaust Council, see Mike again. Thank you all again. Have a nice afternoon.